Hey guys, City Walk, City Wall here, and welcome back to Kobayashi Island. Really though, welcome back to the port of Kobayashi Island. This is an area that was half built and abandoned for way too long, so I'm excited to be coming back here to finish this whole port area out. Basically the goal here was to get as many unique factories and warehouses into this last little bit of the harbor as possible. I've finally gotten almost all of the ore and oil and forest and farm industries built, so now is really the time to get this entire industry supply chain finished. So by the end of the episode, I'll have a pretty good understanding of really how much these unique factories can help with creating goods that the commercial buildings on the island need. And sort of a spoiler, it doesn't help quite as much as I was hoping. First thing this episode was actually filmed eons ago. I filmed it back right when I was doing the part 2 of the Kobayashi Island port episodes. This is now part 3 obviously, and part 2 was 4 episodes ago or something, and I just kept saving this little bit of footage, pushing it back week after week until I finally came back and finished out the port. So for that I was working on adding in a couple unique factories clipped together, and a little area maybe that rents like equipment, and this area now that you're seeing me work on that's just sort of like a warehouse that I hid some more oil buildings inside of. You just saw me place them down, kind of get a little bit more oil production going. Next thing I built after that, which was made much more recently, it was made like when I'm making this episode, was I wanted this area that's under the bridge that connects to this harbor area to be sort of like a shipyard where they build ships. And you just saw me place down the shipyard asset, the unique factory from the Industries DLC. And next to it, I built sort of like a small supply area with some containers and props and things that I would imagine would be sort of used to build the ships. And when I was doing this, I noticed just how many goods the shipyard produces. And I think, you know, it might be the single most productive unique factory out there. So what I decided to do was use the Move It mod to copy the shipyard, the unique factory, and make a second shipyard, so it's like double the production, even though that's technically not really allowed in the game. I just thought, you know, I really like this asset. I like the way that you can see the ships getting built in different stages. It's like an animated asset. I like how much unique factory goods it produces, and I thought that it could sort of just be like a really large shipyard where they can sort of make multiple ships at once maybe. So put that down, and I realized that this area that I'm placing now that's full of props, I could sort of expand upon that idea, have like a lot more storage around this shipyard area, and I could do that with the vanilla warehouses instead. I think those warehouses, the way that they fill up with clutter as they get more full of goods, look very similar to like just an area where they store stuff for shipyard, you know, like what I'm doing right now. So I thought that was pretty cool, a good way to get more storage into this area and kind of have it go along with this idea that this is all sort of goods that are needed for the shipyard. But what I did was all those industry warehouses that I placed down, you'll see them get placed down in a little bit here. They're all set to different things. So I mentioned last episode how I was having issues because my warehouses were using 100% of the trucks that they have available. I didn't have enough trucks to deliver goods around the place. So I just needed more warehouses kind of every single kind. So because this is the unique factory area and all sorts of goods need to end up here, I thought this would be a good place to sort of build a place with like all the different types of warehouses. So you'll see that in a little bit here. The other thing that I put down here, which you're seeing me do right now, is this modular house factory. And I initially put it here right next to the shipyard before I realized that I wanted to put a second one. And you'll see me move it here shortly, kind of into a different position. But this one I just detailed up with, again, a few parking lot roads. It's kind of a go-to for me in these factories, is getting parking lot roads going throughout them, and some parking spaces and some trees and props and things. You're about to see me move this entire factory over, which is kind of interesting. Just every single thing, the props, the decals, all gets moved at once. And for the next little bit here, you're just going to continue seeing me put down more of these unique factories and kind of detail them up in a similar way. I wanted to mention, if you've opened up the Kobayashi Island save game that I released a few weeks ago, you may have noticed that this port is actually a little different than what was shown in the episode. In part 1 of building this port, I placed down a bunch of industrial buildings that were shipping container stack buildings all throughout the port area to kind of create the shipping containers. And I ended up replacing all of those with prop versions of the same containers instead before I released the save game. It's actually one of the main things that I've done off camera in Kobayashi Island. I really like to try and show every step of the entire process, but for that, I don't know, I just kind of felt bad about deleting them, and it wasn't very interesting to watch because I was just deleting something and replacing it with a similar thing. But I did it basically because those container buildings, the functional ones, they come in very straight rows, and it seemed a little bit unrealistic to me. I've actually been to a few container yards and walked around them before, and from my experience, they're really, really awesome places. It's super surreal looking, seeing containers stacked hundreds of feet high, but they're kind of arranged a little bit more like mazes from the ones I've been to. They're not in straight rows like how I created it. They're a little bit more disorganized, and maybe they have like a big open central area that has no containers, but then they'll have a few branches going off of them and little nooks and crannies, and it's sort of like a kind of like one big maze with all these giant tractor things carrying containers going all around, and it's pretty crazy, the scale of it. But I don't know, the way I had done it with just a bunch of straight containers in rows seemed very stiff and informal, and not really how you might see it in real life. So I tried to get a little bit more creative with how the containers were arranged. And the other cool thing is those container buildings that I had originally had floodlights attached to them, and I didn't have very much choice about where the floodlights would be. And so this time around I got to place down my own floodlights in really specific places rather than using those floodlights that came with the building, which I think turned out really cool as well. The other thing I wanted to mention during this little bit of time here while I'm just building more and more factories is I finally got my new PC up and running and working, and it's really exciting. It's really, really powerful, which is great. It's actually not a new PC. The case is really old. It's like 8 or 9 years old. I've had it since forever. It used to be my work computer. I did tons and tons of work on this computer, and over time the parts started failing and it just kind of became unusable, and I eventually got a new computer. But it was really fun taking this out of the closet and buying all these new parts and having them arrive and installing them and getting the computer up and running and getting it kind of updated to a 2020 or whatever. I bought some really nice parts for it, and it was just a really fun process. This case I've had for so long, it's like covered in stickers of all these different things over time, all these different places I've done work with it on, and things that have happened in my life, stickers from that. It's really nice to be able to see this like glowing with LED lights and looking all like modern and stuff after it was such an old computer and did so much work so long ago. So it's really exciting. I got a new processor, which is a i9, or what is it, Ryzen 9. It's a Ryzen 9 AMD processor, and I got 64 gigs of RAM and new motherboard for the processor because I used to have Intel. The only thing that's still there from leftover is I used to have a graphics card. This was like the most recent part that I bought like before the computer died. It actually died like only like a month after I got the graphics card, so the graphics card was not used ever basically. It's an old GTX Titan graphics card, NVIDIA, and the power supply and the case obviously were from the old computer as well, but it's pretty amazing how well this computer runs. It like boots up in 2 seconds, opens the game way faster, the frame rate is crazy. So I'm really excited to be working on this in Kobayashi Island now with this new computer because it's just making things way faster, way more responsive. This game really runs very well on Windows and obviously even better on this computer. So I'm excited to, have the ability to really build this city kind of a lot bigger than I maybe could have if I was running on a worse computer. So very exciting stuff. So like I said at the beginning of the episode, once I got all of these unique industrial buildings down and let the game run for a little while and see how things were going, it did kind of turn out that having all these unique factories, pretty much every single one that's available and a few duplicates of one, so maybe even more than what's available, it really wasn't going to be enough to deal with how many goods the commercial buildings on the island need. I'm still sort of running at a deficit where there's a lot of commercial buildings requesting goods still, even with all this stuff. So it really is gonna have to, come down to the airport and how much the airport is really gonna be able to import. I'm pretty optimistic about it. I have always sort of noticed that ships are a little bit slower at bringing goods to the island and not quite as good at it for whatever reason. It seems to me like trains are maybe the best, and airplanes are also pretty good at being quick and bringing goods to the island and importing a lot of stuff. I think buildings kind of prefer to import things from trains and airplanes as opposed to ships. I don't know why, but that's just sort of my experience. Maybe I'm wrong. So I think building an airport is going to be the next big step here. And for the immediate future, working my way towards the airport. And real quick, what you're seeing me do, I just placed down a road that goes right through the middle of this ore area that I had originally built in part 2 of the harbor area. And you're seeing me place down some props to make it look like trucks can come in and out of that building, and the road goes right through the middle of the building. And I'm placing down a second road here that goes through this oil industry and kind of separates these two big tanks here. And the reason that I made these two roads, I spent a long time off camera looking at the traffic in the harbor, and it was pretty rough traffic, a little bit difficult to get around, a lot of trucks, and I was noticing that the two biggest bottleneck places were in that ore area and oil area, and it was difficult for trucks that were just trying to get from one part of the ore area to another, or one part of the oil area to another. They were just trying to deliver goods between, maybe the processing buildings and the refining buildings or the warehouses. They were just trying to move around, and they were kind of getting stuck because they didn't really have a good place to like turn around or make a little loop or anything, and they were going onto major roads and blocking up things. So I kind of identified those two little points as places that if there was a tiny little road there, it would alleviate traffic a bunch, and it ended up doing that. And what you're seeing me do right now, which I really enjoyed doing this, I'm making a breakwater for this harbor, kind of like to protect the harbor from waves and whatnot, And I'm going to be making a little lighthouse here in a second, and I think it's pretty cool. There's like a little dock for, the lighthouse worker to pull up a boat. There's a little boat at the dock, and a big path that leads out to the lighthouse on the tip of this breakwater. And when I made this, you're seeing me place down some rocks around here, and it does look kind of weird how it's just rocks and sand and there's nothing else. I felt like the way that there was only sand on these kind of sandy shoals like around the entire Kobayashi Island, it made the shoals look sort of, I'm not sure what the right word is, but just like not very permanent. Like it might be very easy for a big storm to come and completely wash away these sandy islands, sandy banks like around the edge of the Kobayashi Island. And so what I ended up doing here in a second is using the sand tool to kind of delete some sand and replace the centers of these shoals with grass. You're seeing me do it right now. And then after this, I'm going to go through and put down a ton of trees on these sandy shoals, sort of like these areas have actually been around long enough for lots of trees to grow in the middles of them. So it looks a little bit more permanent. It makes this harbor look a little bit more protected, even if it's just sort of like modifying little bits of the terrain and adding trees and changing the colors of things. I think it helps to make this area, make these shoals look a little bit more like they are acting and helping with the breakwater. And I also think it just makes the whole island, because I did this around all parts of the island, not just around the harbor. I think it just adds a little bit to how the island looks from a distance, The last thing that I worked on this episode, which you're seeing me start to do now, is kind of mess with this area that leads from this big freeway junction to where the airport's going to be. I wanted to create the road that goes to the airport, and I thought that the way I had originally done this tunnel was kind of awful. I really, really hated it. It was like one of my least favorite things that I've built on Kobayashi Island. And I know I built it kind of to be temporary, but I just needed to figure out a better solution. So what I did was I decided to subscribe to these tunnel shed props, which you're seeing me place down one now. I think it's called a tunnel rock shed, something like that. It's like a kind of like a half tunnel where one of the sides is exposed and you're able to look out from the tunnel at the water or whatever is nearby. And the top of it is still a tunnel, like there's like terrain and rocks and grass up there. And so what I did, which actually ended up working out really, really well, you're seeing me do it now, is use the network surface assets to place down grass over the top of the tunnel, as well as I use these Ronix 69 pile assets. They're like rock piles or piles of sand or something. And I use those because they're non-conforming props, so you can raise them up, which is what I did, and made it look sort of like that there's terrain going completely over this shed tunnel thing. So, or rock shed tunnel, I think that's what it's called. So the great thing about that network grass asset is because it's a network, the game kind of treats it like a road. So it treats it similar to terrain, where you can place trees and grass and things on top of it without having to like raise them all up individually, which is really awesome and saved me a ton of time. So you're seeing me place down a bunch of this grass and these trees and all this stuff on top of the tunnel shed to kind of blend it in with the terrain and make it look like the train was coming down and over these props. The one downside about this thing that I think it'll kind of be unique but is not ideal is the tunnel shed props are only wide enough for 3 lanes of traffic and not 4. So in one of the directions I had to do a 1-lane freeway, and the other one has 2, but it means that going to the airport is gonna, you may hit some traffic. And I decided to do it in that direction just because in terms of, I'm more concerned with importing things than I am with exporting things. So I don't want there to be a traffic jam when you're trying to leave the airport. I'd rather there be a traffic jam when you're trying to get back to the airport with an empty truck as opposed to a full truck. So after I did that first tunnel shed, kind of went around to the other side of this little peninsula here and did a second one. I think this one's slightly longer, but it's pretty much the same process. So, you know, we're making our way through the series here. It's episode 30, and I definitely have gotten a lot of Kobayashi Island done. For sure, more than half, probably closer to like 2/3. And what I'm planning on doing, I'm starting to think a little bit more about what this next series is going to be after Kobayashi Island, my next sort of playthrough save game. I have a pretty good idea of what I want to do. Actually, a very good idea of what I want to do. Like I said, you know, a number of episodes ago, my next series, I do want to put a good more effort into kind of starting it off on the right foot. Like Kobayashi Island, if you go back and watch some of the early episodes, they're not amazing. And my narration, my commentary is terrible. I think the episode format isn't great. I think, you know, sort of the intro and outro sequences that I do could be improved upon. There's a lot of things that from the get-go I want to do better on this next series, and I'm starting to kind of plan and prepare for that. And one of the things is this new series is going to require some custom assets. So I'm starting to kind of try and think about what I'm going to need and how I'm going to get it. And I just wanted to put it out into the air. If anyone is, you know, who watches this series and is interested or knows how to make custom assets and would like to become involved in some way, please feel free to hit me up. I am going to try and learn how to do it myself, but at the same time, I also would love some help, because I think the more custom assets that this series has, the cooler it's going to be. I think it's really kind of limitless with the concept that I want to do of what can be done and what kind of assets can be made, and really awesome things that can be added to sort of the story of it. So if that's something you're interested in, feel free to hit me up. I would love to have as many people as possible involved. Hit me up on Instagram or Discord or in the comments here. All of them are listed in the description, how to reach me on those things. So I think that could be really cool. So that's about it for this episode. The last little thing you're seeing me do here is using some railway replacer assets, some bridges that it comes with, to make a little bridge for the roads that go over that river, and placing down some lights inside the tunnels. And next episode, we're going to work our way towards the airport area, kind of build a little extension of the harbor and that flat land on the top left that you're seeing. But until next time, guys, take it easy.